The howl of a sick wolf is unmistakable. It doesn't have the power and purity of a normal wolf's howl. It's hoarse, intermittent, as if the animal is choking. That's exactly the howl I heard in that dank fall of 2020, when I was walking around a distant section of the reserve. Little did I know then that this would be the beginning of a series of events that would change the way I thought about serving in the taiga. My name is Jack Harper. As a child, like many boys from Kemerovo, I spent all my free time in the mountains. My father, despite his engineering profession, often took me hiking in the Kuznetsk Alatau. Maybe that's why after school I didn't hesitate to join the army. I wanted a real man's work, difficulties and trials. Mountain shooters became my destiny for 10 years. First I did compulsory service, then contract. Exercises in the mountains, special operations, work as a mountain training instructor. I fell in love with this life, when not only your life, but also the lives of other people depend on your decisions and actions. Mountains do not forgive mistakes and teach you to appreciate every moment. After my dismissal in 2015, I tried to live in the city. I got married. But something broke inside. After the relative freedom of the mountains, concrete boxes crushed me. The noise of cars exhausted me. Crowds of people annoyed me. My wife couldn't stand my metamorphosis. They got divorced, and I kept looking for my place. In April 2017, fate threw me into the Sayan Biosphere Reserve. The Medveji cordon at the confluence of the Kandat and Taigish rivers met me unkindly. Rain with snow and penetrating wind. But when I went out for the first time to bypass the site, something twitched inside. It was like coming home. The taiga did not accept me immediately. It has its own laws, unlike the army regulations. In the mountains, the main thing is altitude and relief. And here everything is important. Wind direction, freshness of the trail, behavior of birds, shades of silence. Raymond Cole, my partner and mentor, often said, "In the taiga, you should listen more than look. It will tell you where something is wrong." In 3 years, I had learned my eerie like the back of my hand. I knew every trail, every stream, every animal rookery. An old army compass and a map with notes became an extension of my hand. In bad weather, I could walk the route almost blindly, orienting myself by senses alone. In the reserve, I found what I lacked in the city: silence, which heals the soul, and work, which has real meaning. There are no random people here. The taiga quickly weeds out those who come for romance or easy money. Only those who are ready to live its life, obeying its rhythm, remain. In 3 years, the service in the reserve has tested my strength 3 times. The first time was in the fall of 2020, when I heard that very terrible wolf howl. Every gamekeeper knows that if something goes wrong in the taiga, trouble is waiting. And the trouble came, but not alone. In the spring of 2021, a scientific expedition disappeared without a trace. And in the fall of 2023, I came across a discovery, which even now, after a while, goosebumps run from the memory. 3 different stories, 3 trials, and each of them left its mark, not only in the reserve's incident log, but also in my memory. October 15th was freezing cold. Low clouds covered the sky. Visibility did not exceed 50 meters. The drizzle periodically increased, turning the forest trails into a slippery mess of fallen leaves and mud. I checked the long-distance trail along Stony Creek, where Raymond Cole had found strange footprints the day before. The wolf's paw prints looked unusual on the damp ground, the animal constantly changing direction, as if it couldn't walk in a straight line. Something about the tracks disturbed me. I'd seen a lot of things in my 13 years in the reserve, but these tracks, they were wrong. The fog distorted the sounds, making them muffler and closer at the same time. Somewhere a woodpecker chirped, its work echoing in the damp air. Old habits came back on their own. I moved the way I'd once been taught in the mountain rifleman. silently, holding my carbine at the ready. For some reason I remembered our instructor. In the mountains there is no right to make a mistake. Once relaxed, and you are already dead. At 9:30 in the morning I heard a howl. Not a normal wolf's voice, but some kind of torn, hoarse sound. Goosebumps ran down my spine. There was something so wrong about that howl that I wanted to turn around and walk away, but I couldn't. If the beast was sick, it was dangerous not only to the inhabitants of the reserve, but to people as well. The wolf appeared about 30 meters away. A large male, but his fur was matted and hanging in shreds. He was wobbly. His eyes were cloudy, with an unhealthy glint, and his mouth was foaming. All the signs of rabies. I caught myself holding my breath. The beast had noticed me. In a normal situation, the wolf would have gone straight into the thicket, but this one turned its head slowly and grinned. My finger rested on the trigger. I didn't want to shoot. Every shot in the reserve is a last resort, but there was no choice. The echo of the shot dissolved into the fog. The wolf collapsed in place. My hands trembled slightly as I lowered the carbine. Not from fear, from realization. The last time I had shot a living creature was in the Caucasus, and since then I hope never to pull the trigger again. The next day, alarms began to come from the village of Kamenka. A forester's family lived in the village, a wife and 2 children. The youngest, Claire, always waved to me from the porch when I passed by. Now their home was a stone's throw away from possible danger. By October 20th, the situation had become critical. We were finding more and more animal corpses within a 3-kilometer radius of Stony Creek. Raymond Cole's face turned black when we discovered a dead bear. "Doesn't hibernate, wanders around like the plague," he gritted through his teeth. "Not even I've seen one of those." Night duty was exhausting. In the pitch darkness, every rustle made me flinch. I caught myself thinking that for the first time in many years I was afraid of the dark. Not the usual taiga darkness to which you get used to, but some new one, concealing an unknown threat. On October 23rd, checking a new sector, I came across a ravine eroded by rain. Fragments of old metal barrels, almost eaten away by rust, were sticking out of the clay slope. A strange chemical tang hung in the air. Climbing higher up the slope, among the young aspen trees, I found the remains of a concrete foundation. Raymond Cole, seeing the pictures, tossed his pipe into a corner. It was the first time I'd ever seen him so angry. "I know this place." His voice shook with rage. "There was a chemical warehouse here back in the 80s. They said they took it all out. Lying bitches. They buried it and forgot about it, and now it's coming out." The next morning, the first group of specialists from Krasnoyarsk arrived, analytical chemists in protective suits. They methodically collected samples, soil from different depths, water from the ravine, vegetation samples. By evening, preliminary tests confirmed the worst fears. The samples contained the strongest neurotoxins. Chemists explained, these substances had been accumulating in the soil for decades, and fall rains and landslides had washed them into the groundwater. Animals who drank this water suffered nervous system damage. 2 days later, a full-scale operation to eliminate the chemical dump unfolded. 2 brigades of the Ministry of Emergency Situations with special equipment, ecologists, geologists arrived at the site. The area was cordoned off. Warning signs were put up. A tarpaulin canopy was installed over the ravine to protect it from rain, which could carry poisonous substances. The work was carried out around the clock in 3 shifts. Specialists in chemical protection drilled monitoring wells, determining the boundaries of contamination. Excavators removed the soil layer by layer. Each bucket was checked by dosimetrists. The extracted remains of the barrels were packed into special containers. The soil, soaked with chemicals, was loaded into sealed vehicles for transportation to the hazardous waste landfill. By the end of the first week of work, it was clear that the contamination had penetrated deeper than originally thought. Geologists discovered a fracture in the rock bedrock. Through it, toxic substances could seep into the aquifer. A groundwater interception system had to be installed immediately. Raymond Cole did not leave the workers for a single step. He remembered the location of every structure of the former warehouse, pointed out places where unaccounted for burials could remain. "I will not allow a second time," he repeated, checking every cubic meter of earth removed. "We've had enough of one." In the second week of the work, they began to reinforce the slope. First, they laid a special waterproofing membrane, then a layer of bentonite mats, which do not allow water to pass through. Clean soil was poured on top. Sensors were installed in the control wells for constant monitoring of groundwater composition. By the end of November, nature began to return to normal. Morels returned to their usual places. Moose grazed by the stream, and crows flew to the cordon for treats. But since then, I have been carefully checking all old buildings and suspicious places in my rounds. In the taiga, you can still find traces of human carelessness that may one day wake up and remind you of themselves. On April 12, 2021, a sudden warming began. The snow in the mountains melted rapidly, turning the streams into raging torrents. The thermometer read plus 15 degrees Celsius, an unusually high temperature for this time of year. The avalanche danger had reached a critical level. That day, a 3-member scientific team arrived at the cordon. Expedition leader Thomas Blaine, geologist Jason Reeves, and young specialist Emily Stone. Their task was to study avalanche processes and the impact of spring melt on rocks. I scrutinized their itinerary. The group planned to walk along the northern spur, install sensors at 5 key points, and return in 3 days. The route was difficult: steep slopes, scree, several dangerous passes. In normal times it is possible to pass there, but now during the period of active snowmelt. "Why don't you put it off for a week?" I suggested to Blaine, showing him the weather report. "Water's coming in, slopes are unstable." He only waved it off. "We're on a grant, we're on a deadline, and it's not the first time we've been in the mountains. We'll manage." The group had its first communication session in the evening of the same day. They reported that they had set up camp at the foot of the first pass and installed 2 sensors. Everything went according to plan. The next session was scheduled for 1900 hours on April 13th, but at the appointed time, the radio was silent. I tried to contact the group every half an hour, to no avail. By nightfall, it was raining, intensifying the melting of the snow. On the morning of the 14th, having received no answer, I announced an alarm. 2 groups went out to search. The first was led by me, the second by Raymond Cole. We were joined by 2 Emercom rescuers and an experienced local hunter, Bennett Ray, who knew every trail in these mountains. Climbing up to the group's first campsite, we found an abandoned camp. The tent was partially covered with wet snow. Inside, there were sleeping bags, a backpack with Emily's personal belongings, and uneaten food. Judging by the tracks, the group left in a hurry, taking only the essentials. Near the tent, they found the first oddity: Blaine's professional camera, carelessly thrown into the snow. Such treatment of expensive equipment was uncharacteristic for an experienced scientist. On the last frames, pictures of the slope with some dark spots on the snow. The photos were taken around 4 o'clock in the afternoon on April 13th. By the evening, the weather deteriorated sharply. Visibility dropped to a few meters. The radio could barely get through the interference. We were forced to stop the search until morning. During the night, the temperature dropped to 0. The wet snow turned into an icy crust. On April 15th at 11:20 a.m., rescuer Logan Scott spotted a bright spot on the slope, an orange life jacket. That's where we found Jason Reeves. He was alive, but severely frostbitten and semi-conscious. He was evacuated by helicopter to the regional hospital. At the hospital, Reeves told a confusing story. According to him, on the afternoon of the 13th, they found evidence on the slope of a massive landslide that had occurred recently. Blaine insisted on examining the spot closer. While they were exploring, the weather began to deteriorate rapidly. We were coming down the scree when we heard a rumbling sound, Reeves recounted. It was snowing from above, a lot of snow. Thomas Blaine yelled to split up. I remember the rest of it in bits and pieces. I think I was dragged down the slope. I woke up in the dark, alone. I was screaming, trying to walk, but I was quickly exhausted. His testimony puzzled rescuers. According to the weather station, no avalanche activity was recorded that day, and the traces at the site of the accident spoke of something else. It seems that the group split up before the weather worsened. On April 16th at 1540, the search dogs picked up the trail. In a small clearing 3 kilometers from the first camp, we found Emily Stone. She was lying in a shallow ravine, protected from the wind by a rock canopy. Her leg was injured, but she remained conscious. Her version of events differed from Reeves's. According to Emily, there was no avalanche. The group did find evidence of a recent landslide, but it had occurred a few days before their arrival. Blaine became interested in some strange geologic formations on the exposed rock. He started acting weird, Emily recounted. He kept taking pictures of these rocks, writing things down in his notebook. And then the argument started. Jason was saying we should go back. The weather was getting bad, and Thomas Blaine insisted on staying. They almost got into a fight. I've never seen anything like it. Solid scientists, and they acted like. Anyway, Blaine went off up the hill, said he'd be back in an hour. We never saw him again. The next day they found his backpack at 1,800 meters. The notebook inside was soaked and the writing was blurred, but the last few pages could be made out. Hurried notes about some anomalous geological structures, quick sketches. The last entry was cut off at half a word. For 3 more days we scoured the slopes, descended into crevices, examined every suspicious trace, all to no avail. On April 19th, when the hope of finding Blaine alive had all but vanished, the search was officially called off. The report read, "Missing under unclear circumstances." Later, looking through the documents of the expedition, I noticed one detail. Geological surveys were not the main goal of the group. In the terms of reference, there was a note about some anomalous zones of increased erosion. What exactly was Blaine interested in on that slope? What did he see or understand? These questions remained unanswered. And a few days after the completion of the search, Jason Reeves suddenly quit the Institute and left town. Emily Stone returned to work, but flatly refused to discuss the events of that expedition. Gradually, the story was forgotten, but I continued to regularly check that slope, trying to find any trace that could clarify what had happened. And after 2.5 years, such a trace was found. However, it turned out to be much scarier than one could imagine. October 3rd, 2023, was cloudy but warm for this time of year. A light rain had been drizzling since morning, and fog was puddling in the hollows. I was conducting a scheduled fall round of the northern sector of the reserve, checking the readiness of animals for winter. The route was not far from the same slope where Thomas Blaine had disappeared 2.5 years ago. The spring floods and rockfalls had changed the terrain considerably. Where there used to be a relatively gentle scree, there was now a steep rocky slope. At 9 in the morning I noticed fresh tracks of a large bear. The animal was obviously nervous. It walked unevenly, often stopped and circled on the spot. Such behavior is unusual for this time of the year. Bears should already be preparing for hibernation, gaining the last weight on berry-bearing areas. The trail led me to a pile of rocks at the foot of the slope. A small landslide had once come down here, forming a sort of natural grotto. Gusts of wind carried a pungent odor, the way it smells when a large predator digs up old carrion. As I approached the grotto, the first thing I did was to look through the telescopic sight of my carbine. The bear was there, a large male, weighing 300 pounds. He was methodically digging something between the rocks, occasionally breaking off pieces and moving away. Suddenly, the wind changed direction. The bear instantly reacted to my scent. He raised his head and sniffed. For a few seconds we looked at each other. Then the beast rose leisurely and disappeared into a thicket of young aspen trees. There was no aggression or fear in its behavior. It just did not want to mess with a man. What I saw in the grotto made me freeze. Between the stones I could see human bones. Scraps of clothing and fragments of climbing equipment lay nearby. In a leather wallet, almost untouched by time, were documents in the name of Thomas Blaine. Having carefully recorded the place of discovery and taken the necessary photographs, I contacted the cordon and requested an investigation team. The helicopter with the experts arrived a couple hours later. The investigation team worked until dark. The expert criminalist, a young and meticulous guy, paid special attention to the contents of the dead man's jacket pockets. Among the finds was a sealed plastic pencil case. Inside were 3 flashcards and folded sheets of a field diary. The diary entries were of particular interest to the investigators. The handwriting changed noticeably from neat, scientific at the beginning, to hurried, almost illegible at the end. The last pages contained scrappy notes. The structure doesn't fit. Reeves won't listen. Need to check again. They won't understand the significance. A professional geologic hammer with signs of recent use, found among the belongings, indicated that Blaine had been actively working before his death. Particles of rock not typical of this slope were found on clothing and equipment. Investigator Daniel Brooks, who arrived from Krasnoyarsk, immediately drew attention to contradictions in the old testimony. Reeves claimed that the group was hit by an avalanche, although weather data did not confirm this. Stone talked about the quarrel, but kept silent about its cause. And according to Blaine's notes, he found something so important that he was alone on the slope. On the second day of the search, forensics made an important discovery. The grotto where the remains were found used to be a deep crevice. Spring floods and rockfalls had gradually filled it in, changing the terrain. That meant Blaine wasn't just looking for shelter from the weather. He was exploring the crevasse with purpose. Checking the flashcards added new questions. 2 of them contained the usual scientific materials photographs of rocks, instrument data, measurements. The third had been deliberately damaged. Someone had tried to destroy the information on it. When questioned again, Jason Reeves, now a consultant for a mining company in Norilsk, finally told the truth. The group had indeed discovered an unusual geologic anomaly, possibly of commercial value. Blaine insisted on more research, while Reeves suggested they contact the Institute immediately. It was like he was obsessed, Reeves admitted. He kept saying we didn't realize the magnitude of the discovery, and the weather was deteriorating rapidly. I decided to leave. Emily came with me. Blaine stayed behind, said he'd catch up with me. I thought he was just stubborn. But it turns out he found something so important he gave his life for it. The official report gave the cause of death as hypothermia in unfavorable weather conditions. But there were unanswered questions. Why did not the experienced scientist try to descend to the base camp? What did he discover in the crevasse? And what data was stored on the damaged flashcard? A week after the investigation was completed, a group of climbers reported strange sounds from underground in that area. A low, rumbling, vibration-like sound. But the commission that arrived did not detect any anomalies. The denouement came unexpectedly. Jason Reeves died in a car accident a month later. The police ruled it an accident. Emily Stone resigned from the Institute and left the country, and the crevasse where Blaine's body was found was finally covered by a massive rockfall in the spring of 2024. The taiga can keep its secrets. Sometimes it opens them, revealing a sliver of truth, and sometimes it hides them again, as if to make it clear that not all mysteries are to be solved. For 3 years, my service in the Scion Reserve has taught me a lot. I realize that taiga is not just a territory to be protected. It is a living organism that has its own memory and laws. The story of the sick wolf showed how long nature can keep traces of human carelessness. chemicals, buried and forgotten 30 years ago, almost led to an ecological disaster. If not for Raymond Cole's expertise, the consequences could have been far more serious. The disappearance of the scientific expedition in the spring of 2021 still raises questions. What exactly did Blaine find on that slope? Why did his find scare Reeves so much? And was the car crash that killed him an accident? The answers to these questions will probably remain buried forever under the tons of rocks that collapsed into that crevasse. Sometimes in the evenings, sitting by the stove at the cordon, I look over the entries in the incident log. 3 cases, 3 stories, so different, but connected by some invisible thread. Each of them began as an ordinary incident, but gradually turned into something more. Raymond Cole often says, "There are no accidents in the taiga." Now I know what he means. Everything that happens here has its cause and its effect. It's just that sometimes the connection between them becomes obvious only years later. I'm still on duty at the Medveji cordon. Every day I go out on the route, check my site, make observations. But now I know that there are other threats besides poachers and forest fires. Less visible, but sometimes more dangerous. And my task is not only to protect the reserve from people, but also to protect people from the secrets that this ancient forest keeps. And the taiga. It still lives its own life. It hides its secrets under the thickness of stones, under a layer of moss, under centuries-old trees, and only occasionally reveals them to those who are ready to hear its voice. Think how many more such gifts are hidden in our taiga. How many dangerous burial sites, forgotten warehouses, and abandoned objects are waiting for their time. And most importantly, who will be responsible for the consequences when they make themselves known? And the story of the missing scientist. What did he find there on the slope? Why did one of the surviving members of the expedition die in a car accident, and the second hurriedly left the country? Coincidence? Or is there something more behind it all? If you like this story from the life of the Taiga Reserve, put a like and subscribe to the channel. In the next issues you are waiting for new stories, no less mysterious and exciting. And in the comments share your thoughts. What really happened on that mountain slope? Thanks for watching, and see you in the next episodes.